Okay, hello grade 8, how are you today? I hope you're all well and sound. Now, find your geography books because it's our geography class right now and open them on page 217. It's time for us to continue looking at Latin America, but today we're not going to look at its rivers and mountains, at least not as close as we did last week, but it's time for us to start talking about different countries that may be found in that region. And today we will start with the very north of Latin America, with Mexico. So, you will open your books on page 217, or if you wish to have a quick look at the map, you will open your books on page 216, okay, and you will find Mexico. It's orange on your map, okay? Now, the history of Mexico is the story of the conflict between native peoples, or as we call them, Native American Indians, and settlers from Europe, especially from Spain. The result was a blending of Indian and Spanish cultures that has greatly affected Mexico's development and the country as we know it today. But was this conflict the only cause for Mexico to be as it is today? I guess we shouldn't forget about another factor. We will talk about history and human factor a bit later, but we have to start with something much more important, something bigger. Here, look at this physical map of Mexico. Can you see some noticeable landforms here? Okay, please spend a couple of minutes and find as many landforms as you can see. Can you see any peninsulas? I guess I can see two. One here and one here. Can you see any seas? Okay, so here there is big gulf, okay, and it is connected to the Atlantic Ocean through the sea, to the Caribbean Sea, okay. Here we have another gulf which is connected to the Pacific Ocean here, okay. I can also see some mountains here, okay, and something that looks like a desert, or at least some dry land here. And these areas look not very high to me and probably covered with some vegetation the same way they're covered here. Huh? What do you think? Now there are some rivers also. How do you think? Are these geographical features or landforms important for the history of the region and for the formation of the country or not? I guess they are. We will watch, but first we will see the map itself. Okay, so now look at the names. Oh, look, the peninsula here is called Baja California. The peninsula here is called Yucatan. The Gulf here is called Golfo de California, and the Gulf here is the Gulf of Mexico, the one which is connected to the Caribbean Sea and later to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, now the mountains here are called Sierra Madre Occidental, and in the south they turn to Sierra Madre del Sur. They have two different names and they seem to be two different chains of mountains, but actually both of them belong to the same chain of mountains. You remember last week we were talking about mountains in South America, the Andes, and I told you that they are connected with the Rockies in North America, and technically it's all a very long chain of mountains, right? It's the same chain of mountains. So the Rockies in the United States and the Andes down there in South America are linked together by the mountains that run here. So Sierra Madre Occidental and Sierra Madre del Sur are both parts of the same huge mountain chain that runs from North America and down to South America. Okay, now I would like to offer you a video that will give you some ideas how these landforms affected the country and its history.
Mexico is defined by dramatic geographic features that have shaped the country's politics. Forming the southern portion of North America, Mexico borders the tropical Central American Isthmus. A broad band of desert defines Mexico's northern border with the United States. To the east and west, the Sierra Madre Occidental and Sierra Madre Oriental dominate the Pacific and Caribbean coasts, forming highlands that cradle the heart of modern Mexico. The desolate Baja California Peninsula shields approaches from the Western Sea. To the east, the tropical limestone outcropping, named the Yucatan Peninsula, dominates entry from the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. Mexico's Central Valley, which includes Mexico City and the adjacent Veracruz region, form Mexico's core. To control Mexico City is to control Mexico, and the greatest conventional threats to Mexico City have historically come from the deep-water port city of Veracruz. Since the 16th century, Spain, France, and the United States, not to mention mutinous factions of the Mexican military, have used Veracruz to threaten and conquer what is now Mexico City. Mexico's mountains and frontier territories are traditional hotbeds of unrest. From the rebels of Chihuahua and Chiapas to the drug kingpins of Nuevo Laredo and Sinaloa, the historical and ongoing challenge for Mexico is to subdue and incorporate far-flung, geographically isolated communities. The modern expression of this struggle can be seen in today's war with drug trafficking organizations, but it is a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history and has been shaped by the nature of Mexico's physical geography.
So you see, it's not just you as people, as person who affect the history of the region, but also those mountains and lakes and rivers and even trees that grow there. They may also affect what is going on in the history of your country. So you might have heard that people in Mexico don't speak any Mexican language. No, there is no such thing as Mexican language, at least not today. So they speak Spanish because country was conquered in the 15th, 16th centuries, especially 16th, 17th centuries, by Mexican conquistadors, and they brought their culture and their language there. Okay, but the territory of present-day Mexico was originally occupied by many different native peoples that came and settled there before any Europeans ever came there. These people included the residents of Teotihuacan, an early city-state, and also the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Maya, and the Aztecs, as well as a number of other smaller groups and tribes. And some of these civilizations were not in existence when Europeans came, but some of them were still there and thriving. So now, by the time Europeans came to what is now known as Mexico, that land has already been home to several great civilizations. You will watch these two videos and say which of these civilizations Spaniards confronted on their arrival to Mexico, the Maya or the Aztec. First, the Maya.
The Maya. They're considered one of the most advanced civilizations to have existed in the Americas before the Spanish conquest. But who exactly were the ancient Maya people, and what led to the collapse of their civilization? As early as 1800 BC, The Maya had begun settling and established villages in what is today Mexico and Central America. Maya civilization peaked from 250 to 900 AD, during what archaeologists call the Classic period. More than 40 cities flourished throughout the region, with populations as large as 50,000. The Maya built magnificent urban centers consisting of stone structures, including pyramid temples that were central to Maya religious practices. In addition to these impressive city structures, agriculture played a key role in Maya civilization. Corn was one of the predominant crops. The Maya creation story tells of nature gods, the basis of Maya religion, who created humans out of yellow and white corn. The Maya also made significant advancements in mathematics and astronomy. They invented the concept of zero, and they developed an accurate calendar system. Used to guide the Maya agricultural cycles, the calendar was based on observations of the sun and sky over thousands of years. The Maya also developed the only known system of writing in Mesoamerica, hieroglyphs. In fact, much of what we know about ancient Maya civilization comes from deciphering hieroglyphic characters inscribed in pottery, stone slabs, and other ruins discovered at ancient sites. Hieroglyphs have revealed that, despite the Maya's ingenuity and agrarian lifestyle, conflict was prevalent among some Maya city-states as they battled for control of the region. Throughout much of the Classic period, the city-state of Tikal, located in modern-day Guatemala, reigned as the closest thing to an empire in Maya history. But for a period of roughly 130 years, the Tikal people were overtaken through force and diplomacy by the Kanul, a rival kingdom. Toward the end of the Classic period, around 900 AD, most Maya cities had collapsed. Among the theories are warfare, a volcanic eruption, and, perhaps most likely, drought. However, archaeologists still debate why, as new evidence continues to emerge. Despite the decline of ancient Maya civilization, the Maya people have by no means disappeared. More than 7 million Maya are estimated to be alive today in their indigenous homelands and around the world. While they participate in modern global life, they continue to follow agricultural and ceremonial practices of their ancestors.
We're here at the Templo Mayor, the main temple of the Aztecs, which is in present-day Mexico City. This was the heart, the most sacred place in the Aztec Empire, but they didn't call themselves Aztecs.
They called themselves the Mexica, or more accurately, the Tenochca Mexica.
And they called the city Tenochtitlan.
That basically means the place of the prickly pear cactus. The name Aztec is something that was given to them later in the 19th century, and the Mexica, or the Aztec, belonged to a much larger ethnic group called the Nahua, who spoke Nahuatl.
And they founded their capital city here because of a vision that they saw at the end of a very long period of traveling.
One of the most important myths for the Aztecs was this migration myth, where they left their mythic homeland of Aztlan from a place called Chicomostac, or the place of the seven caves. And the ancestors begin this migration because their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli, told them to go on this migration and to behold the sign and to establish a city there.
And the sign that they saw at the end of their journey was an eagle perched on a cactus that was growing out of a rock
in the middle of a lake, and that lake is here in central Mexico, and in fact, modern-day Mexico City is on top of that lake.
The city of Tenochtitlan is founded in 1325, and the city is a planned city. The Spanish, who conquered it 2 centuries later, were awed by the incredible planning. They saw canals. They saw 4 major causeways going through the city, meeting at the center point of this temple where we are now.
The city was all laid out on a very careful grid plan. This was a very ordered, very clean, urban center.
And it had 4 quadrants, and this was part of Aztec ideology.
They believed that the universe was divided into 4, and so what the city reflects is this cosmological diagram with Tenochtitlan as the center of the universe and their main temple, the Templo Mayor, in the sacred precinct as the center of that center.
We're talking about the center of a vast empire with subordinate cities that paid tribute to the Aztecs.
Some of the goods that made up this tribute included lots of luxury and precious goods, like feathers or greenstone or textiles.
It was critical for the Aztecs to bring prisoners from those subordinated cities here to Tenochtitlan to be part of a sacrificial ritual.
Maybe some of you are familiar with what's called the Flowery Wars, which was a form of ritualized warfare or battles where the main point was to acquire captives for the purpose of sacrifice. And initially they didn't have this vast power over the Valley of Mexico. They were subordinate to some other places around the lake who they eventually defeated, and they formed what's called the Triple Alliance. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. Eventually, the peoples of Tenochtitlan became more powerful.
We're talking about a city that at its height had between 200 and 300,000 people estimated.
So with such a large population, it was critical to find ways to feed the people that lived here. And so there were important agricultural techniques used, like chinampas, these muddy raised beds to help provide food for the people of Tenochtitlan. And the landscape played a critically important role also in ritual. We know that there were many processions made to various mountains around the lake.
It's hard to imagine as we look over Mexico City today that this was once a lake.
And it's after the Spanish conquest in 1521 that you begin to have the draining of the lake. But of course, it's still a lake bed, so you can actually see the parts of Mexico City that are sinking.
One of the largest cities of the Mesoamerican world in the 15th century is one of the largest cities today in the 21st century, Mexico City.
So, now, which of these two confronted Spaniards when Spaniards came to America? Yes, the Aztec civilization was still thriving and was able to confront Spaniards, while Mayan civilization, the Mayas as people or tribes, they were still living in Yucatan, but as a great civilization, strong military power, they ceased to exist at about in about 900 AD. So, okay, Aztecs, and it's interesting thing, and it was mentioned in the video, that this name, the Aztec, stuck to these people only late in the 19th century, while these people themselves call themselves Mexica, and these Mexica gave name to Mexico. You see, it's just different ways of saying and spelling, and some mispronunciation. They all affected that the name Mexica turned into Mexico. And you can still see, when you look at this flag of Mexico, that in the middle of it there is this eagle sitting on the pear fruit cactus, holding this snake in its beak and claw, okay, representing that very eagle that showed ancient Mexica people the place where they would found their capital, Tenochtitlan. So, now, I guess you wonder about the end of the Aztec Empire, what happened to it when the Spaniards came there, and to learn about it you will watch this video. By the way, you can also read about Native Americans and the Spanish conquest in your books on page 217.
When Spanish ships landed in Mexico in 1519, the mighty Aztec Empire was at the height of its power. From their capital at Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs controlled much of what is now Mexico and Central America, ruling some 15 million people. Aztec palaces were as vast and sophisticated as any of those in Europe, and their temples rivaled the Egyptian pyramids. But within just 2 years, the mighty Aztec Empire crumbled, and Tenochtitlan lay in ruins after a brutal siege led by Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. No great ancient civilization ever fell so far, so fast. What happened to the Aztecs? For one thing, they had too many enemies. For years, the Aztecs used brutal force against neighboring tribes and city-states, forcing them to pay costly tributes and hand over victims for the human sacrifices central to the Aztec religion. Cortés turned these people's hatred of the Aztecs to his advantage. Spanish invaders also had superior weapons, plus guns, trained horses and dogs, and fully loaded warships that allowed them to overcome the Aztecs' greater numbers. Ineffective leadership also played a role in the fall of the Aztecs. Their emperor, Montezuma, believed Cortés might be the bearded Aztec god who was prophesied to conquer his people and bring universal peace. Unsure how to confront the Spanish leader, he was captured in 1520 and was later killed, possibly by his own people. His brother Cuitlahuac took over, leading an army that drove the Spaniards from Tenochtitlan. But the Aztecs then confronted another powerful enemy, smallpox. Brought aboard Spanish ships, the disease decimated the Aztec population, killing the new emperor and thousands of others. With the help of several thousand Indians, including Texcacans, Chalca, and Tepanec, Cortés and his Spanish force besieged Tenochtitlan, cutting off the city's water and food supplies. Despite a fierce resistance, the Aztec city fell on August 13, 1521. More than 200,000 people died in the struggle. With the Aztec Empire effectively destroyed, Cortés became governor and captain general of New Spain in 1522. Under Spanish rule, Mexico City rose from the ruins of Tenochtitlan, and Christianity spread throughout the region, replacing the temples and traditions of a once great ancient civilization.
Very sad. In 2 years, such great civilization was in ruins. Now, the Aztec capital ruined, Spaniards built a new city on its bones. We will watch this video to see how Mexico City developed into a 21st century megapolis. And important thing, what were the most important events in the history of Mexico? Okay, so we're not just watching the history of Mexico City, we're also watching the history of Mexico itself. And you can also learn about Mexican history on pages 217 and 219 in your books. Chapters Colony and the Country and One Party Rule. Okay, so here we go.
There is an old Aztec legend about the founding of the city. While the Aztecs were looking for a new land, their principal god led them to their new home, an island in the middle of a lake, by showing them a sign, an eagle perched on a cactus with a snake in his beak. This is how, in 1325, the city of Tenochtitlan became the capital of the Aztec Empire. 2 decades later, the city was one of the largest and richest urban area in the world at that time. In 1519, Spanish invaders, led by Hernán Cortés, arrived in New Spain. Moctezuma, chief of the Aztec, received them like if they were God, because their look fitted the story of an old prophet. Cortes used this legend to manipulate Moctezuma and rule the population. In 1520, Cortes had to leave the city. The Aztec, tired of the presence of the Spaniards and the weakness of their emperor, took advantage of the situation and put the Spaniards out. When Cortes came back, he reconquered the city and nearly erased it.
These ruins behind me are the only remains of the old Aztec city.
In order to erase all history of the old empire, Cortes built the new city of Mexico over the ruins of Tenochtitlan. The rebuilding of the city has been accomplished mostly by indigenous people and cost many lives. The Spaniards planned the city as agreed, like most colonial cities, such as Cartagena or Panama City. The Zócalo Square was and is today the central place of the city.
The square I'm in right now is called the Plaza Zocaldo. It was the ceremonial center during the Aztec period and remained the main square during the colonial period and nowadays.
14 years later, in 1535, the Spanish viceroy arrived in Mexico. This is smog and pollution. Villagers from the countryside who continued to pour into the city to escape poverty only compounded the city's problem. This past decade, there has been a growth in the population, but a diminution of the density. The city tends to sprawl to the outside. All of the population growth in what is now called the Valley of Mexico has occurred outside of the urban core. In the 50s, the urban core represented 78% of the population. By the year 2010, it was only 9%. Today, the city of Mexico is one of the most populated in the world, with nearly 9 million people in the city core and 21 million in the metropolitan area.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it.
Okay, I also hope you liked it. Now, this is all for us about the history, or the deep history of Mexico. Okay, now back to Mexican City. We will watch this video about modern megapolis of Mexico City, and what are, you see, the previous speaker already mentioned some factors that affected its growth. Okay, now you will watch it. You will watch this video, and again you will hear something about the factors that affected the growth of Mexico City, and you will also try to find the answer to the question: what is the biggest problem of this metropolis today?
What makes this place unique? It is the world's largest city at an elevation higher than 2,000 meters. With 21.2 million residents, it rivals New York City for the title of largest metropolis in the Americas, and it is one of the world's oldest continuously populated urban areas. But what truly sets this megalopolis apart is also its biggest challenge. It is the largest city on Earth without direct access to a significant body of water. Although that wasn't always the case. This is an examination of Mexico City and the water crisis that threatens its continued prosperity. Nearly 7 centuries ago now, the Aztecs came across an island in the middle of a lake in a vast valley more than 2,000 meters above sea level, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest coast. 300 years later, a small group of Spanish explorers, led by Hernán Cortés, arrived, and what they found was a thriving capital city, the heartbeat of the Aztec Empire, with 300,000 souls. It was called Tenochtitlan, and it amazed the Europeans. Its labyrinth of canals, dividing a network of man-made islands, reminded them of Venice, and they wanted it for themselves.
There in the center of the lake was this gleaming white city. It was something they had never seen before, and for us, we could almost imagine as Dorothy looking at at Oz for the first time. It was far larger, at 250,000 people, than any city they had ever seen in Europe.
Armed with superior weaponry and the most powerful exterminating agent, disease, the Europeans wiped the Aztecs out and systematically dismantled their great temples and pyramids. Then they set out to quickly build the most renowned city in the Americas. They rejected the Aztec way of living harmoniously with the land and instead filled their canals, destroyed their floating farms, and drained water from the lake until it was completely empty. This set the city on a collision course with nature. Over time, it has grown to cover the entire lake bed and well beyond, and because 2 volcanoes, one of them still active, loom over the city from the south, the soil is a mix of clay from the lake and volcanic rock. That's an unusual foundation to build a sprawling, heavy, concrete jungle on, and it's why the city is sinking. But people keep on arriving, because the defining feature of Mexico City is centralism, the idea that all paths lead here. What used to be trails converging on grassy highlands became dirt roads used by carts and donkeys loaded with goods, and are now the arterial roads that move millions. The explosion of Mexico City's population, like other megalopolises around the world, follows the widespread adoption of the motor vehicle. In 1950, its population was 3.1 million. As paved highways became more common, it jumped to 5.5 million by 1960. Then nearly tripled to 14 million inhabitants by 1980. This boom has exacerbated the city's 2 most urgent challenges, bringing in enough water for 21 million people, while simultaneously sending away the millions of liters of wastewater they produce each day. The city is failing on both fronts. Now, it's worth noting that crime is not Mexico City's most pressing concern. It can be a dangerous place, but the reality is that while the country has seen its murder rate rise as drug cartels battle for territory, the federal district has some of the lowest crime rates in Mexico. It has installed more than 22,000 surveillance cameras throughout its 16 boroughs, and put thousands more police officers on the street. Increased security keeps violent crime in check and creates opportunities for educated and artistically inclined young people from the surrounding states. It's a young, vibrant place, with an economy that accounts for 1/4 of the country's GDP, while holding more than 1/5 of its population. That's one of the highest capital-to-national ratios in the world. Centralism, remember? Its neighborhoods are diverse and flow endlessly into one another. One minute it feels like you're in Paris. Turn the corner and it's Manhattan, but just a few streets over lie the rundown avenidas of Tijuana. Above all, though, it's crowded. Mexico City is the most congested place in the world. Although it has an excellent 12-line metro system that's cheap enough for anyone to ride, its 5 million cars snarl the roadways on the streets above. Which brings us back to the water crisis. The city experiences a powerful 1-2 combination that amplifies the intense droughts and downpours that come with climate change. A gigantic concrete slab situated at the bottom of a valley surrounded by mountains that block in its pollution. It's a heat sink that speeds up evaporation while preventing rainwater from entering the water table below. So the city had been counting on its Grand Canal to expel 280 cubic meters of wastewater a second from its overflowing sewers. But it relies on gravity to pull the water away. As the city sinks, the canal becomes less and less effective. Today it works at just 30% of capacity. The ever-shifting ground also means that many of the 8,000 miles of pipes delivering drinking water leak, resulting in the devastating loss of up to 40% of what's originally pumped up from freshwater sources many miles away. And that's just the situation for the residents lucky enough to have a constant supply. 20% or more of Mexico City residents can't even count on water flowing from their taps every day. This has created an incredibly inefficient system where fleets of trucks fill up their tanks and drive to deliver to customers by hose, house by house. That's an expensive way to live, and it's why many low-income families have to spend 10% of their monthly income for just 10 gallons of water per person per day.
In Iztapalapa, there are 1,000 trucks distributing water to 2 million people, which is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of those people.
It's expensive, inefficient, and customers like Silvestre Fernandez, a struggling cab driver, are not satisfied.
Sometimes it takes 1 or up to 5 days after we request it. And sometimes we can't buy other things, like diapers for the baby, because we have to pay for water.
Meanwhile, residents living in the wealthy neighborhoods consume 100 gallons on average a day from their free-flowing taps and pay just 1/10 the price. This rampant inequality amplifies the destabilizing effects of climate change, and water-starved communities like these exist all over the world, which is exactly why the US Pentagon calls climate change a threat multiplier. The director of Mexico City's water system explains what a severe drought could mean. Quote, "We're facing a potential disaster. There is no way we can provide enough trucks of water to deal with that scenario. There is a serious possibility of unrest." One study says up to 10% of Mexico's population could eventually head north if droughts and floods get out of control. The recent migrant crisis in Europe underlines how difficult it is to stop hundreds of thousands of people who are fleeing for their lives from crossing borders, seas, and yes, even fences and walls. To help solve problems like this, Mexico City's local government is gaining more power to govern itself. It clearly needs it. The deeply unpopular President Peña Nieto has simultaneously cut all funding for Mexico City's water fixes, even as he advocates for a multi-billion-dollar new mega airport in a part of the city, a dry lake bed, that could make the water problem worse. There's no easy solution to this ongoing problem, but Mexico City has no shortage of smart people eager to get the job done. One of the longer-term solutions could be the widespread adoption of rainwater harvesting that's being tried in some states.
Rainwater harvesting is actually quite a simple thing. What we do is the rainwater that falls on the roof of a house, we channel it to a cistern and we pass through a very simple process that first flushes the water and filters it. Why are we pumping water from over here when we're having water falling on us from the sky for free in huge abundance? We just haven't known up until now how to take advantage of that.
In the short run, though, a great place to start is by fixing one leaky pipe or sinking section of canal at a time. Thanks for watching. Many of the ideas in this video came from a fantastic piece in the New York Times by Michael Kimmelman, which I read while on a recent visit to Mexico City. I saw a lot of the things I just talked about, good and bad, firsthand on my trip, and I'm looking forward to discussing and answering any questions you might have in the comments below. This is the first video in our new weekly Megacity series that will combine two of our most popular topics in order to profile the biggest challenges of the 21st century.
Okay, so what is the biggest challenge or the biggest problem of this huge Mexico City metropolis today? Indeed, water. Water is the biggest problem. Water to drink, first of all, and second, used water or drain water that needs to be taken from the city is also the problem. Okay, other problems include the sinking of the city, because the city, even though it doesn't have enough water, it sinks slowly because the soil it's built on is not very hard. It's not built on the rock, but rather on sand, the sand of the lake. And by the way, isn't it surprising that the city that was originally built on the lake does not have water today? Instead, they are sinking in the lake's sand. Slowly the city is going down. Okay, now, yes, crimes are also a problem, but it is not as big as natural problems with water and sinking of the city. Now, what were the factors that affected the growth of the city? Indeed, first of all, was the belief of Mexican authorities that all the roads must lead to Mexico City, which means they believe that all the life of the country must be focused, concentrated in Mexico City. And due to that, in 1950s, the country built perfect, like good roads that led from different parts of the country to the city, which brought this huge growth. And actually, that brought the city to the problem of lack of water. Okay, so because the more people you have in your city, the more people you will need to provide with food and water. They didn't say anything about food. I'm pretty sure that everything is fine with food there, but something is wrong with water and something must be done with it. Okay, so water is the biggest problem of Mexico City. Now, what other issues does Mexico have today? You will read about it on page 221, and then you will think if your country faces similar challenges or not today. Okay, so 5 minutes for you to read this page, please. And after you're done reading this, you will write down your homework. First of all, you may revise the lesson and extend your knowledge about Mexico by looking back at pages 217 through 221, the ones that we worked with today. Okay? Then, you will also read about the countries of Central America and the Caribbean on pages 222 to 227. This will be new information for you, and after or while reading it, you will answer this question: are these countries similar to Mexico or very different from it in terms of history, culture, and economics? So technically you are asked to compared the countries of the Caribbean and Central America with Mexico. Okay, so you will read and you will compare. And third thing, you will make sure that you are able to find the countries from the lesson, which is Mexico, and countries from homework on the following blank map. If you need help, you will go back to the map on page 216. But right now, well, not right now, after you're done reading the homework text, okay, you will be asked to find these countries on the blank map. Okay, and that is all for today. Thank you for your attention and see you the day after tomorrow. Bye.